I need you to be honest with me for a second. How much time has your organization spent debating where people should work? Remote, hybrid, 3 days in, 2 days out, mandatory Tuesdays and Thursdays, flexible Fridays? The spreadsheets, the surveys, the town halls, the passive aggressive emails about empty desks. Now, let me ask the follow up question nobody seems to be asking. How much time has your organization spent defining what a great culture looks like, regardless of where people sit? Because I promise you, the location question is a distraction, a loud, time consuming, energy draining distraction from the conversation that actually determines whether your people thrive or quietly disengage. Today, we are setting the location debate aside and getting to the real issue: culture quality. What the data actually shows about flexibility and engagement, and how to build a high value leadership culture that works whether your team is in a building, on a couch, or somewhere in between. Welcome to Unlock, Empower, Transform. I am Shay Blackmon, HR strategist, culture transformation consultant, 3-time published author, and DBA candidate in organizational leadership. For over 24 years, I have led HR functions across automotive manufacturing, healthcare, and professional services, including environments with plant floor teams who never had the option to work remotely and corporate offices that went fully virtual overnight. So I have seen this question from every angle. This is episode 60, and if you caught Thursday's episode on why the performance review is dead, today's conversation connects directly. Because how you develop people, how you give feedback, how you build trust, none of that is determined by a zip code. It is determined by culture. And culture is a leadership choice, not a real estate decision. Today we are covering why the location debate misses the point entirely, what the data reveals about flexibility and engagement, and how to create high-value culture regardless of where your team works. Plus, I have an exercise that connects to the Shield Resilient Strategy Guide. Let us get into it. Here is the fundamental problem with the remote versus office debate. It treats location as the variable that determines culture, and that is simply not true. I have seen toxic cultures in beautiful open-plan offices where people sit 3 feet apart and still do not communicate. And I have seen deeply connected, high-performing teams that are spread across time zones and have never shared a conference room. Location does not create culture. Leadership does. Systems do. Intentionality does. And when organizations skip that conversation and jump straight to how many days in the office, they are solving for proximity when the real problem is purpose. In my book, High Value Leadership, Transforming Organizations Through Purposeful Culture, Chapter 6 addresses driving organizational change. And one of the most important principles in that chapter is diagnosing the real resistance before implementing the solution. When organizations mandate return to office, they are often responding to a symptom: productivity concerns, collaboration gaps, disengagement. But they have not diagnosed whether those problems are actually caused by location or by leadership, communication, and culture deficits that existed long before anybody worked from home. Think about it this way. If your team struggled with collaboration when they were remote, what makes you confident they will collaborate better in person? If the underlying problem is that your meetings lack structure, your feedback loops are broken, or your leadership team does not model the behavior they expect, putting everyone in the same building just gives you the same dysfunction with a longer commute. There was a mid-sized technology company that mandated a full return to office in 2024. Within 6 months, voluntary turnover among their highest performers increased significantly. When they conducted exit interviews, not a single person cited missing the office as the reason they stayed previously or leaving because they had to come back. The consistent theme was that leadership used the return to office mandate as a substitute for actually fixing the culture. The mandate felt like control disguised as collaboration, and high performers do not tolerate control for long. Now, I want to be clear. I am not anti-office. I have spent most of my career in manufacturing environments where being physically present is non-negotiable. The plant floor does not have a Zoom option. What I am against is using location mandates as a proxy for leadership. If you want collaboration, design for collaboration. If you want connection, invest in connection. Do not just demand that people show up and assume the rest will follow. Let us talk about what the research actually says, because the data tells a much more nuanced story than most return to office memos would suggest. The consistent finding across multiple studies is not that remote work is better or that office work is better. The consistent finding is that autonomy and trust are the strongest predictors of engagement, regardless of location. When employees feel trusted to manage their work and have meaningful autonomy over how they accomplish their goals, engagement goes up. When that trust is removed, whether through surveillance software, rigid scheduling, or punitive attendance tracking, engagement drops. The location is secondary. The trust is primary. Here is what is particularly important for women in leadership to understand. Flexibility disproportionately impacts women's ability to sustain careers. Women are still carrying a disproportionate share of caregiving responsibilities, and rigid work location mandates create an invisible barrier that does not show up on any diversity report. When organizations eliminate flexibility without examining who is most affected, they are making a decision that will disproportionately push talented women out of the pipeline. That is not an opinion. That is a pattern that repeats across industries and has decades of data behind it. Now, here is the nuance that gets lost in the debate. Flexibility does not mean absence of structure. This is where a lot of organizations go wrong. They interpret flexible culture as having no expectations, and then they are shocked when things feel disorganized. High-value leadership is about balanced responsibility, the fourth pillar of the framework. High standards paired with high support. You can absolutely have clear expectations, consistent communication rhythms, and accountability while also giving people flexibility in how and where they meet those expectations. There was a healthcare organization with a mix of clinical staff who had to be on site and administrative teams who could work remotely. Instead of creating a one-size-fits-all policy, they defined what culture quality looked like for both groups. They established shared values, consistent communication practices, and equitable access to leadership regardless of location. The clinical staff did not resent the administrative team's flexibility because the organization had done the work to create cultural parity. Both groups felt equally valued, equally informed, and equally invested in the mission. That is what happens when you lead with culture instead of mandates. The emotional intelligence pillar of the high-value leadership trademark framework is critical here. Leaders who can read the emotional landscape of their teams, who understand that a return to office mandate might land very differently for a single mother than for someone with no caregiving responsibilities, those leaders build cultures that retain talent. Leaders who treat every person's situation as identical build policies that look fair on paper but create inequity in practice. So, what does it actually look like to build culture that transcends location? Let me walk you through the framework I teach in the High Value Leadership Intensive course. First, define culture in behavioral terms, not physical terms. Instead of "we value collaboration," followed by a mandate to be in the office, define what collaboration actually looks like. How do decisions get made? How does information flow? How do people give and receive feedback? When you define culture through observable behaviors, you can measure it, reinforce it, and develop it regardless of where people are located. Second, invest in connection infrastructure, not just office infrastructure. Connection does not happen because people share a building. Connection happens because leaders create the conditions for it. That means intentional one-on-ones, team rituals that build trust, cross-functional exposure, and opportunities for people to be known beyond their job titles. Some of those things happen beautifully in person. Some of them happen just as well virtually. And some of them do not happen at all if leadership does not prioritize them, regardless of the setting. Third, create equity of experience. This is where most hybrid models fail. They create two tiers: the in-office employees who get more face time with leadership and more visibility, and the remote employees who get overlooked. High-value leadership demands that every team member has equitable access to information, development, recognition, and leadership attention. Chapter 6 of my book talks about engagement strategies and organizational alignment. The principle is the same whether your team is co-located or distributed. Connection to purpose, value demonstration, and impact communication must reach everyone equally. Fourth, measure culture health, not attendance. Track engagement, trust, psychological safety, development velocity, and retention by team. Those metrics will tell you far more about your culture's health than a badge swipe report ever could. If your in-office teams are just as disengaged as your remote teams, you do not have a location problem. You have a leadership problem. There was a manufacturing company with both plant floor and corporate support teams. The plant teams resented the corporate team's hybrid schedule. Morale was fracturing. But when leadership dug into the real issue, it was not about where people worked. It was about perceived value. Plant teams felt invisible to leadership. So the organization redesigned their communication cadence, brought plant leaders into strategic conversations they had previously been excluded from, and created recognition systems that were equitable across both populations. The resentment faded, not because they equalized location, but because they equalized culture. Exercise time. This one connects to the external support and daily practices components of the SHIELD Resilient Strategy Guide. I call this the culture quality check, and it takes about 5 minutes. Step 1. Think about the last 2 weeks. Rate each of these on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is not at all and 5 is consistently. Do I feel connected to my team's purpose? Do I receive feedback that helps me grow? Do I feel trusted to manage my work? Do I have equitable access to information and leadership? Do I feel valued for my contributions regardless of where I work? Step 2. Add up your scores. If you scored 20 or above, your culture is strong regardless of location. If you scored between 12 and 19, there are gaps that need attention, and a location mandate will not fix them. If you scored below 12, the location conversation is masking much deeper culture issues that require systemic intervention. Step 3. Identify your lowest scoring item. Now ask yourself, would changing my physical work location improve this score? For most people, the answer is no. And that clarity is powerful. It shifts your focus from advocating for a location preference to advocating for culture improvement. The SHIELD Guide's external support section reminds us that building strong professional support systems, whether it is a sponsor, mentor, peer ally, or coach, is what creates resilience. Those relationships can be built in person or virtually. And the daily practices section provides the strategic check-in questions like, how am I feeling right now? And am I operating from strength or reaction? That help you navigate these workplace transitions with clarity instead of frustration. Here is what I want you to walk away with today. The remote versus office debate is a proxy war for a much more important conversation about culture quality. And until organizations have the courage to address culture directly, no location policy is going to solve the engagement, retention, or connection problems they are trying to fix. If this episode resonated, here is what to do next. Download the Shield Resilient Strategy Guide. The link is in the show notes. It is free and it will give you tools for building strong external support systems and daily practices that keep you grounded no matter what workplace transitions you are navigating. Grab a copy of my book, High Value Leadership: Transforming Organizations Through Purposeful Culture. Chapter 6 covers driving organizational change, including how to diagnose real resistance, build coalitions, and sustain momentum through transitions exactly like this one. The link is in the show notes. And if you are ready to build a location-proof culture in your organization, join the waitlist for the High Value Leadership Intensive course. We go deep on creating cultures that work, regardless of where people sit. Link is in the show notes. Drop a comment and tell me, does your organization's work location policy match its culture reality? I want to hear the truth, and I read every comment. On Thursday, we are back with episode 61, Succession Planning for the Forgotten Generation. If you are a Gen X leader wondering who is thinking about your career trajectory while everyone else debates millennials and Gen Z, that one is for you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for pushing beyond the easy debates and into the real work. I am Shay Blackmon, and until next time, keep unlocking your potential, empowering those around you, and transforming the cultures that need you. Take care.